Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk with you guys about kind of a controversial topic here in the fitness community, and I want to break it down a little bit. And that topic is how vegans oftentimes try to link dairy with osteoporosis or bone demineralization. Now I want to talk about this in detail a little bit, the best I can, put it in layman's terms, because it's a big argument. It's one that vegans propose over and over and over, and apparently they don't always keep up with the latest research either. And again, like many of us, they have a tendency to cherry pick research that they think backs their point. So I'm going to put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do some crafting, and let's discuss this. All right, first of all, let me do the little clips for the people who don't want to watch a long video. In short, in spite of all the various scientific and political arguments on the topic, it appears to be the two biggest factors that cause osteoporosis are vitamin D3 content in your bloodstream and how physically active you are, if you're sedentary or not, along with obesity and things. Those are your biggest factors. But we're going to look at the different arguments that are made for those who want to know in a little more detail. Now, I want to state up front, I'm not trying to knock vegans here because I understand your guys' ethical argument. I completely get it. I completely understand it. I don't agree with it, but I respect your right to your ethical argument. All right? I'm not going to disrespect the fact that you have a strong ethical belief, that you have a right to, you know what, I live in a free country where freedom of expression and freedom of beliefs are legally protected. And I believe in people's right to have their own personal ethics. And so, therefore, I support the right of vegans to have their ethics. Okay? I don't want you guys to think that I don't. But I have a problem when you start trying to skew medical information to support your cause and not keeping up with the times when international bodies start disagreeing with you. Because the China study did affect a lot of this. Okay, there's some arguments made there. Highest on the list, they always point out that the countries with the highest consumption of milk have the highest rates of osteoporosis. Now, there is some truth to that. Absolutely is some truth to that. I'm going to show a little chart here for you guys. I'm going to flip through to look at with some stuff. Yeah, there's some truth to that. The top 5 there are all high milk drinking countries. You should note that the USA is way further down the list. Just throwing that out there, which is interesting. I'm going to get to that in a minute too. Now, that being said, the other big thing that they bring to it is, well, what is actually causing it there is the animal proteins. So let's talk about the animal protein hypothesis, because the WHO actually accepted this for a long time. The World Health Organization, up until recently, and I believe in around 2008 or 2009, they completely dropped this idea. A lot of what they were proposing was based upon the China study, when they looked at different demographics in China and a few other countries and found that osteoporosis rates were higher in populations that had a higher meat consumption. All right, that was noted, absolutely noted. But as we're going to get to with the dairy thing, the countries that drink dairy, correlation does not equal causation. There are other factors there. If you guys don't understand that, people will say, well, how can you say correlation doesn't equal causation? Well, the best example I was ever given was in a freshman level science course. I had a professor explain that we have studies that show conclusively in America that rates of teen pregnancy are inversely correlated with the number of kitchen appliances in your household. Meaning the more appliances that a family has in their kitchen, the lower their rates of teen pregnancy. So, if we were to say correlation equals causation, we would say that all those appliances in the kitchen stop teenage pregnancy. They prevent it somehow. That there is a correlation between stopping teenage pregnancy in a household and the number of appliances in your kitchen. See the problem with that? You want to know the reality? Wealthy people have more appliances in their kitchen. Wealthy people are more likely to keep up with what their daughters are doing, keep a closer eye on them, be involved in their lives. More likely to know if they're going to have sex or not, who they're hanging out with, what boys they're hanging out with. If they're out past a curfew that they set, and they're more likely to put them on birth control. Therefore, in that case, it's actually wealth and the social things that go with wealth that affect teen pregnancy rates. Now, I'm going to suggest that wealth may play a factor here in osteoporosis as well. We're going to get to that also. But it has later been found that this was based upon an acidity hypothesis. Well, first of all, later studies have shown there is no correlation between that, at least not universally, and they've also found the acidity hypothesis is false. And we go, what? I've heard this for years. Yeah, I know you've heard it for years. It's based upon the idea that animal proteins have more sulfur in them, but you know what? It turns out that there are a lot of plant proteins that have just as much sulfur as meat does. And there's a lot of research being done trying to study to understand the buffering agents involved, of how the body doesn't need to pull calcium from the bones exclusively as the means of buffering the acidity in your GI tract from your food, from your dietary proteins. In fact, even researchers have proposed that mathematically, if this was even possible, that if that was actually true, that was the only means of buffering it, then the average American would actually lose all of their bone mass within 3 to 4 years just because of the American diet, if that was the only means the body had to buffer it. So it's not true. It's mathematically not true, scientifically untrue, that you have to leach calcium from the bones is the only means of buffering the acidity. And again, that's been shown. The average American consumes enough animal source protein that if that was true, they would have no bones within a few years' time. Well, we clearly do. In fact, we suffer a lower osteoporosis rate than a lot of these other countries on the list that are first world countries. So, the dairy thing. Also, Harvard University did quite a few studies on that. What they actually found is that there is no correlation, positive or negative, between dairy intake and osteoporosis. So, they dispelled 2 myths. Number one, they dispelled the myth that consuming dairy will actually prevent osteoporosis or mineralize your bones better. There's no correlation found. And it also gets rid of this vegan idea that it's the cause of it. It doesn't help or hurt you. Dairy itself seems to be completely neutral regarding bone mineralization. It doesn't seem to even be a factor. So, again, the vegans should be happy because even though their hypothesis has been crushed by Harvard University's data, it's been crushed. They should also be happy because it also shows something else. It removes the idea that you have to consume dairy to help your bones as well, which should make them happy because they don't want people drinking dairy. So, in that case, one of the health benefits of dairy has now been removed as well. So, seems to be neutral there. So what's really going on in these countries? What's the actual causes? Why do we have these problems? Well, 2 things most of the countries with the highest osteoporosis rates have in common. Number one, they're further north. They are further north. What does that mean? They're darker countries. Osteoporosis rates tend to be higher in countries that are darker with less sunlight. Well, that's a no-brainer. That is a no-brainer big time. You know why? Lower vitamin D, because that's what they did find. The Harvard studies did find that vitamin D3 intake was strongly correlated with reduction of osteoporosis. While dairy itself did nothing, vitamin D3 sure did. Well, how do you produce vitamin D3 without consuming excess in your diet? By getting sunlight. Problem is that a lot of these countries don't get enough sunlight year round. In fact, even the minor amounts of D3 they put in their foods may not be enough to counteract the darker months of the year. I mean, look at some of these countries, Sweden, Finland, Ireland, some of the countries with the highest rates. Well, they have really, really dark winters. What else do they have in common? More likely to be sedentary. You're more likely to be sedentary. Well, being sedentary is strongly correlated with osteoporosis, no load bearing. So these are countries, first world countries, with a lot of people who are sedentary because we're so well off that people can afford to be. There's a lot of people who have sedentary jobs. People don't have to be physically active as a majority to survive in these countries. Interestingly enough, what we found, I mean, for example, when we look across ethnic groups, because what it actually turns out, the reason we do okay in America A lot of people exercise now. That helps. Obesity has been correlated, though. That's another factor I'll get to. A lot of people exercise in North America, and we put vitamin D3 in everything. We get a lot of vitamin D3 supplementation because we realize it's a problem due to our ethnic diversity. And accordingly, that doesn't help completely because, you would think realistically that it's noted that Caucasian women still have osteoporosis at a higher rate than black women in the United States, which doesn't make sense because you would go, well, black women would get less D3 from their environment, right? They would get less D3. So, because their skin is darker, they're going to absorb less sunlight. So why is it at a lower rate in Caucasian women? Simply put, more Caucasian women tend to be sedentary. Being sedentary actually plays a role. Less physically demanding jobs as an overall demographic nationwide. That is enough to offset the difference in skin color. In other words, in this country, a lot of black women kind of have to have more physically demanding jobs where they're on their feet, do more carrying, more moving. So simply put, that reduces our osteoporosis rates. However, it is noted that when you compare African American women to women in Africa, though, they have a much higher rate in the U.S. Than they do in Africa. So what's going on there? Again, we go back to the sunlight difference versus skin color. Just moving down to a country that overall itself, at least in the northern half of it, is darker, is enough for there to be an issue there. So it does go to show that there is still need among African American women who are living at least in the northern half of the U.S. that they probably need to get more vitamin D3 in. And the other factor, obesity. African Americans suffer from a slightly higher obesity rate, which again could offset that a bit. The obesity itself seems to contribute. So it's a really complex topic with an enormous number of factors involved. And so for people to try to pin it down to something as dairy when there's such an enormous socioeconomic factors involving how sedentary people are, how they exercise, how much vitamin D3 is supplemented in food, sunlight, all of these things, how do the different amount of sunlight people get depending on their skin color versus where they live. It's dumbfounding with so many complex factors that a group of people wants to say, well, no, it's caused by the dairy. And then be so adamant in that when it actually has been studied and it shows that's not the case. But, again, another interesting one that's been determined and looked at, and again, we didn't look close enough at it at first, but you want the most damning case for it. Turns out that now that the protein one has been kind of thrown out by WHO, we have to readdress another one. Which group of people has the highest rate of osteoporosis in the world? Anyone care to guess? Inuits, Eskimos. Now, a lot of people are going to say, aha, well, they eat an almost all-meat diet. There's your culprit. But, you know what it also turns out? Lack of D3. It's still, at the end of the day, it is the lack of D3 in this group that causes it. Why? They still have fairly dark skin combined with living in the darkest environment with the least sunlight on Earth. And it is the sunlight itself there that seems to play the biggest role. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you know what? We're never going to get all these factors perfect, but you know what? Some of us know that we don't have to worry about it. Like me, for example, I lift weights. I don't plan on stopping lift weights. I deadlift several times a week. I do overhead pressing several times a week with heavy weights. That alone puts me in the lowest risk group possible. Combine that with the fact that I don't smoke cigarettes. Turned out to be another factor, combined with the fact that I get plenty of vitamin D3 in my diet. I am at the lowest risk. Osteoporosis is the least of my concerns. Unfortunately for a lot of you, if you lift heavy weights regularly and have for many, many years, you are also, fortunately, in the lowest risk group no matter what your ethnicity is, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what part of the world you live in. Lifting weights is the king. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.